All right, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that Ria is an influencer, Instagram influencer, but more than that, she's an activist. Those are things that I know and love about her. I love her page. Can you pronounce the name of your page, Ria?
Yeah, it's matriarch.
Matriarch. I can't say it
Mm.
with that accent. That sounds so cool. Anyway, she's from the United Kingdom. I also know that. But in terms of her background, I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself and then we'll go straight into her presentation. I hand it over to you, Ria.
Sure. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys. I love what you guys do, and from working with you last year on those Instagram lives, I said, okay, I remember you. You're great. Yeah, it's good to be with you again. So, essentially, what today's kind of workshop is going to be is just an introduction to me, the work I do, the similarities it holds with you guys, and then also most importantly looking after your mental health when doing kind of activism, online community work. I think hopefully societies are moving to prioritize mental health more, but I think that starts with us, so that's why me and Rhonda thought it would be a good one to start with. Um, so before I start, I just want to say I'm not a professional in any way, shape, or form. I don't even have my degree yet, but I'm just like you guys. I'm a student, I'm 20 years old, and I want to make a difference in some way. I've been doing what I do now for about 2 years nearly, and I've taught myself a hell of a lot. And so any way that I can kind of share that information, especially with other young people, that's what I'm here to do. That's what hopefully we can do well. So whatever knowledge I can give you. Also, hopefully I'm not too scary to any of you. If you have any questions at any point or anything like that, feel free to interrupt me, share a reaction or something, get my attention. So yeah, let's go. So my name is Ria Kalsi. I'm a 20-year-old student and I study English at a place called the University of Exeter, which is down in the south. It's about 3 hours drive from London. It's pretty far away from kind of the main city. But I'm an Indian woman. I have Sikh Punjabi heritage in India, but I was born and raised in England. So I very much see myself as British Indian. And because of those things like racism and sexism, societal issues like that were always part of my life, always part of my parents' lives. And it was something that they really raised me and my sisters to talk about really openly. So from a very young age, we were talking about these kinds of things at the dinner table. It's very normal for us. And on top of that, I grew up in a very demographically white area, a very demographically white, rich area, which I was kind of the polar opposite of, really. I didn't kind of fit in with that crowd. And so from a very young age, my race and other kind of demographic factors, um, it was something I was always really aware of. I was really thinking about how that affected me, how that affected the people around me. And then I came to this university, which is very similar in terms of it's very white, it's very privileged, and I tend to be the token person of colour in a room a lot of the time, which I'm sure some of you can probably relate to. And at university, that's when I started to learn more about the theory behind things like racism. So I was reading people like Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined intersectionality, which we might talk about soon, Angela Davis, Franz Fanon, James Baldwin, all these incredible kind of revolutionaries. And that was when I took my personal experiences of racism and discussions and added onto my knowledge through just reading. I just read as much as I could through my degree and my personal time. And it just really helped me understand my view of the world a bit better. So for me, education has always been key to my ability to teach others, to do the work that I do. Education is very, very much at the core of it. So after my first year of university, I was becoming more and more engaged with civics, politics, societal issues, racism, all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to engage with it more publicly rather than just conversations with my friends and family. I wanted to take it to another level. So I wanted to create a platform. And so very, very simply, I just created a blog and an Instagram to go beside that. And I talked about everything and anything. My first blog post was, I don't know if you guys remember when Halle Bailey was cast as Ariel in the live action Little Mermaid. And there was a huge, huge, huge racist backlash. And that was kind of, that really sparked stuff for me. So I wrote about that. So it's very much been from the beginning of my work. And now, nearly 2 years on, Matriarch is a platform that creates a whole kind of host of content. So we do resources, IGTVs, we do blog posts, we have other people write for us. It's a very collaborative space. And at the core of what we do, we believe in listening. We believe in learning by listening. So particularly listening to people who you don't agree with. Change never happens in the comfort zone. So if you want to create change, you've got to go outside of what you know, you've got to go outside of those echo chambers, you've got to engage with people that you probably don't see eye to eye to, but that can really, really create change from great conversation. So that's kind of what I do. Um, and last summer, and that's when I kind of started working with you guys, the pandemic kicked off, the civil rights movement really picked up. And that's when I started to use my voice and my platform to engage more publicly in kind of societal issues, in civics. And it's something that absolutely fuels me. I have an absolute passion for this kind of work. I love that I have a platform and I can use my voice for good, to provide education for people, to kind of teach people not only what's happening, but also kind of the so much miseducation is out there. So that's a lot of what I work towards. And something like my resources are kind of a really key way that I do that. Um, so last summer I created a resource, kind of, it was one that I think that's where me and Rhonda kind of connected through. And I guess that's what you could kind of call a viral resource. It really took off. It's got thousands of comments, shares. And the reason I'm talking about this is because it goes to prove that no matter how small your platform is, how insignificant you think your voice is, I promise you it's a lot more powerful than you think. When I posted this resource, I had about 700 followers, most of which were family and friends. This was not a huge platform. And even to this day, I have just under 4,000 followers. That is not enough to create the amount of impact this resource has. The reason why that resource worked is because it was good content that people needed to see at the time. I believed in what I was creating, and so did other people. And because that passion was there, to share this information, to educate people, it worked. And I really do believe that you guys have that too. So now moving into kind of more my advice on this kind of work in terms of mental health particularly. So whilst this resource was great, I'm really glad it had the impact it had. It clearly affected so many people. I kind of be lying if I said it was a walk in the park. It wasn't at all. It was emotional, it was quite difficult, and it was quite overwhelming, because with any kind of content like that, where you're taking what is seen as quite a controversial topic, quite a polarized topic, you're going to have the good hand in hand with the bad. And in this case, the bad was intense racism. The bad was intense backlash, people who really, really were very angry and very misinformed and very miseducated. When that started, I would reply to comments, I would engage with people, I would answer their questions. And as I said earlier, talking and engaging with people who you don't necessarily agree with is where change can happen. However, when you're doing work like this, you have to absolutely find a line where you draw for yourself and you think, actually, I'm not going to engage in this anymore because it's not helping me in any way and it's only hurting me. You can't convince people into changing their beliefs, especially about topics like racism, in one simple discussion, especially over the internet. And in order for you to kind of process and be able to continue doing this kind of work, there's a point at which you've got to remove yourself from it somewhat and look after yourself. There are personal boundaries you need to set up, even if you just have them in your mind, even if you just know, right, I'm not going to reply to any more comments today or whatever it is. Having that kind of mindset when it comes to content interaction when you're doing activism work is so, so important. So I'm going to just run through kind of three kind of key things that I always keep in mind in order to help me cope with that. I'm not saying I'm perfect at them. I'm absolutely not. They're difficult things to do, but they're things that if you really work towards, they can really help you protect your mental state. So the first one that I kind of really I think is imperative is realizing individual. This is a really hard one to grasp sometimes, but especially when you're a person of color, it's not your job to educate others on issues that not only you experience on a day-to-day basis, but you've also educated yourself on. You've taught yourself independently. So why can't people with more privilege than you do that themselves? They absolutely can. They've just never really had to have that kind of independent thinking before. Um, if you're sat there having to explain to someone what racism is on a day, it's time to just be like, you know what, this is enough for today. I need to protect myself. Change doesn't necessarily happen unless an individual commits themselves to it. And it's not your job to make that happen. If someone doesn't want to change, it's not your job to convince them to do that, especially over the internet. And especially at the end of the day, as a person of color, it's tiresome, it's labor, and you've got to protect yourself and your mind. So that's the first one. It's not your job to educate everyone. The second one is you don't have all the answers. I'm a very stubborn woman. I would love to believe I have all the answers to everything, but I don't. And often people in comment sections of work like this, they're or your DMs, they're gonna play devil's advocate with you. They will ask you extreme questions and pose kind of unrealistic hypothetical situations to test your knowledge, to test your theories. At the end of the day, issues like racism don't need a devil's advocate. They don't need a strong or extreme hypothetical to prove them. And again, it's not your job to kind of prove those to disbelievers, essentially. Your time and energy is much better spent when you're spreading education for the good of a public rather than explaining it to individuals on their terms, on their conditions. You don't have all the answers and you're not claiming that you do. There's always room to learn more. And my advice would be when you're creating content, especially that has like an educative point of view, you're trying to educate for a purpose, to always just note whether it's on the caption or in the comments or on the post itself that you don't know everything and that this isn't kind of the be all and end all. When I make resources, I always make sure to kind of note somewhere that this is a non-exhaustive starting point. And what that means is this is a starting point, but it's not the be all and end all. I don't expect you to take this as gospel. I expect you to kind of do more work on top of this. Go and do your own research. Go and read things that I've suggested. This is a foundational level, and giving your audience that kind of disclaimer in a way protects you from having to feel like you're giving everyone all the answers, because that's not the case, and it's a lot of pressure to deal with. So if you just simply say, I'm not saying I know everything, there's a lot more to learn here, it just protects yourself in a really, really important way for your mental health. So that's the second one. You don't have all the answers and you don't need to act like you do at all. And the third one is separating the long term from the short term. So what I mean by this is obviously we all know something like racism is not an equation that can be solved very simply. If someone's demanding ridiculous hypothetical questions to explain racism or explain a certain situation to prove it, they don't understand themselves what racism is or how racial oppressive forces work. There's no quick fix or solution, but people who don't believe you expect that, because especially when you've always had a certain degree of privilege in your life, you generally will also have had the ability to have answers very quickly or information at your fingertips. And that's not necessarily the case in work like this. So be wise of what you're putting your energy into. Are you going to put your energy into a long term solution, like creating content that can educate the public for a long term solution? Or are you going to put your energy into one person in the comment section that day who's really just trying to troll you? And that's all. So it's making those choices that are going to look after your mind whilst you do work like this. So those are kind of my main three tips for that. Um, in terms of then kind of more so protecting your mental health, at the end of the day, work like this is always going to be personal. And often work like this to do with kind of social justice issues. It's going to be, can you all hear me still? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Sorry, my internet's not incredible. Um, Work like this is going to be motivated by some kind of personal experiences, and as much as we can compartmentalize and remove ourselves, you're never going to be able to fully do that, and you shouldn't have to either. This work, it's the personal, it's your experiences, it's your family's experiences, and so learning when to call it a day and take that time out becomes even more important. um, Sometimes when you deal with I'm going to call them idiots here in comment sections, and you have to explain your personal pain and your trauma to them over and over again, it can be very emotionally draining. And if you're doing it so regularly, or you're using it to create the content that you create, you've got to make sure that you also give your brain some breathing room. So my advice would be actively blocking time out in a week to say, this is when, you know what, I don't do any of this. I leave myself alone. I go and read. I go and take myself away from this in whatever way I can. I just relax. And the reason why I say actively block that time out, if you don't, and you don't say, right, these 2 hours, I'm not doing any of this, your time will just kind of seep together and you won't end up doing it. It's got to be an active effort on your part to look after yourself and give yourself that breathing room. Also, talking to people who share those experiences is great, and working in teams like you guys do, having that kind of collective spirit is so useful. Make sure to lean on each other. You don't need to take it all on yourselves, but if you do feel like it is a lot, making sure to talk to someone else who can give you even better advice is really, really important as well. And prioritizing your mental health in this way, that's what's going to let you not burn out. Emotionally intensive work like this can be exhausting, so making sure that you give yourself that regular time can really stop you from burnout. um, and kind of the way to make this work at its best is just to communicate that, whether you're trying to build a community, whether that's online or offline, strength will always come from honesty. When you're building a community, your audience need to feel that authenticity, they need to feel that connection, they need to feel that you're really building trust through your truth. So communicating that you need a timeout from what you're doing, whether it's just putting a message on your Instagram story or something as small as that, it humanizes online platforms. It reminds people that there are people behind the Instagram posts and all of that kind of stuff, because people can forget very, very easily. But also, when you have an online platform and you're building a community, you have a responsibility to those people and they will be influenced by you. So if you're setting an example and saying, actually, I'm going to take some time out for myself, that is a great example to be setting to other people of color who are possibly following you, who are experiencing the same thing. That way you don't have to explain yourself, but it also keeps people engaged. They're going to want to come back to people who are real and authentic with them. At the end of the day, as an individual, your mental health should always be one of, if not your top priority. So please make sure that you're always communicating how you're doing, how you're feeling with your friends, your family, your team, the people around you, and also the audience that you're building, no matter how small that is, whether it's one follower or 10,000, it doesn't matter, because at least one person will really, really care about that. Um, I hope I haven't rushed through that too much, but that's kind of my general advice in terms of mental health without getting too specific about stuff. But what I thought we could do now is just kind of a Q&A kind of thing. If anyone has any questions about anything that I've said or anything else, whether it's to do with me, my work, or this, go for it.
What was the name of your platform again so that we can check it out? I don't know.
it, it is called Matriarch, and I'll put it in the chat as well.
Thanks.
That's all right.
Out of all the posts and media you have made, which one was your favorite, and what is your favorite topic to advocate for, or the one that you feel most passionate about?
So I think in terms of my favorite, I recently made one. We had a really quite horrific case of sexual violence in the UK recently, and that really drove a lot of online activism in the past 2 weeks. And I recently made a resource about rape and intentions, and that for me was quite a personal one that I really loved to make. It wasn't necessarily the kind of the most popular one, or it doesn't have the most likes or anything like that, but I know that the sentiment that it carried was really, really important. I think in general my heart will always lie with ones about racism simply because it's affected me the most. It's one that I care about so intrinsically, and also the one that I probably know most about as well. So, being able to create content that I know so much about is always so important. So probably that, yeah.
How do you separate your feelings from your work in order to advocate your point across to others?
Good question. I think for me, being factual is a really good way to kind of separate the emotional. So if I have a specific topic, for example, I made a resource about white guilt recently, right? So the best way that I kind of work out to create content is just brain dump basically everything I know about that topic, whether it's personal or factual. I just kind of get it all out, whether those things are personal experiences that I'm basing that resource off of, whether it's a book that I know about that brain dump it, and then I'm able to kind of categorize and separate my personal experience from the fact. At the end of the day, there's always going to be that kind of personal level to stuff, but I try to channel that energy as much as I can into pointing people towards other resources that are really going to help. So by resources I mean podcasts, books, films, literature reviews, all that kind of stuff, and then just packaging it as best I can. I think the other side of content creation, which helps me to make sure that I'm being not only authentic but I guess accessible online, is making sure that the content I put out is also, the visual side of it is really important. Unfortunately, aesthetics on a platform like Instagram, they do matter. So if you put out content that looks great, it's gonna also attract people. We will be doing a workshop later on at some point about this, but putting my energy into that as well and making sure that that information is best packaged so it has the greatest impact, is also another way to kind of be able to separate that. The other side of it for me is I talk to people quite often about what I'm creating, so whether that's my flatmates that I live with, whether it's my family, and bouncing off of people not only gives me more kind of information and more things that I could put into that resource, but it also allows me to kind of, it's catharsis, right? It's a way to get out that emotion, if I have any, towards that particular topic.
So, Ria, um, so just I think actually really love the last point that you made about you. I think sometimes when we see online pages, especially on Instagram, we don't really think about the person behind it, you know, and that you really have feelings about what you're posting. Um, and so, can you just kind of tell us what were some of the things that you went through um, as you experienced, um, you know, kind of getting to the place where you are now, like where you understand that you have to take care of yourself and the other things that you talked about. What were some of the experiences that you went through that actually got you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I first started blogging and when I first just kind of started content creation, I wouldn't necessarily say I was talking so boldly about stuff because I was scared, because I didn't have that confidence in myself to um we the phrase we use in the UK is back myself. I didn't back myself enough to say, yeah, this is my opinion, take it how you want, kind of thing. Um and my confidence has only grown from taking risks, and that sounds really cliche, but it's true. I started talking about racism very, very openly, much more so last summer. And I remember making that first post, and I was, mind my language, I was shitting myself because it was a lot. It was very controversial, and the way I found myself talking about it was very to the point in a way that I've never talked before. I think up until that point I was very much treading on eggshells, didn't want to offend anyone. And there comes a point, I think, when you work hard enough that you really gain an authority in yourself. And gaining that authority was what allowed me to kind of just flourish in what I did. So taking risks was really, really important. And I'm not saying that I've got it right all the time. There are some posts that I've had to go back and revise because I didn't know enough about what I was talking about. And mistakes are really, really important to recognize and revise. You're never, ever going to get it 100% right. And I think with conversations like these, approaching them with, a mindset of continuous improvement rather than kind of I'm right when I say I'm right, is really, really important. I also just went through kind of a large period of reckoning last year where I kind of thought, what do I really care about? What am I putting my time and energy into? And that really allowed me to figure out where my passions lay. And that was kind of activism work, that was civics, that was social justice work. And that's what I poured more of my time into. And you know when you love it, because I have a whole load of essays that I should be doing, but I do this work because I really love doing it and I care about it. Um, and in terms of other kind of personal struggles, there were things like when the pandemic was kicking off and I was still here in Exeter in my student town, and I received some racism due to the fact that I was Asian, and this was when it was the kind of Asian virus and all that kind of stuff in the UK that particularly peaked around March, April time last year. And it made me angry. It made me really pissed off, and I talked to my dad about it, and he was 40 years older than me, and he experienced the same things, and we talked about it every day. Nothing had changed. Um, and how can I sit there and kind of be upset and complain about it if I'm not doing anything myself? So that's kind of where a lot of it comes from for me in order to create change, and I'm sure a lot of you guys recognize that in yourselves as well. I think Sophia sent a question. How long have you been doing what you've been doing? So I started my platform July 2019, so it'll be 2 years this coming July. And believe me, there have been many, many times where I thought, should I be doing this? Does anyone actually care? And when you create content, especially on a platform that's as saturated as Instagram, it can very much feel like that. It can very much feel like, is anyone even listening? But as I said, I got to my kind of 1 year anniversary mark last July. I had 700 followers. Like I said, a large majority of whom were people I knew, friends and family. And it was really demotivating because I thought, I'm making all this content, I'm really excited about it, and no one else seems to care. but I kept doing it because I cared so much about it, and suddenly people picked up on it. But it didn't matter if people picked up on it or not, because those 700 people, that was a community that I had really fostered of people who cared about the content I was creating. So when I did create that kind of content, people were really there for it. People were really excited about it. And that's what really allowed it to flourish. It wasn't just kind of 700 random people who followed me back because I followed them. It was 700 people who cared about these issues, who really wanted to engage. So when it comes to an online platform, time can be really demotivating, but I promise you, keep working, and if the passion's there, honestly, it will work out. Gracie, have you ever had a bad reaction from a classmate or friend that disagreed with you? Yes, actually. One of my flatmates who I've now lived with for 3 years, he's kind of in my friendship group. We kind of in the UK, we are basically on two ends of the political spectrum. We have had radically different, and it is kind of Republican, Democrat. We have Conservative and Labour here. That's kind of our version of it. And we come from polar ends of the spectrum. He is a white male, I am a woman of color, and our experiences have been incredibly different. Particularly last summer, we had a lot of conversations that really scared me, and to this day still make me nervous, because sometimes when you get so involved in this work, you realize that you could be living with people who vote for political systems, who have beliefs that were built to keep you and your family and your friends down. And when you sometimes have that realization, it can be really scary, and that really makes me nervous. I've had a couple of moments like that since last year, and you realize actually how privileged some people are around you. It's very easy to get caught up in that emotionally, and the best way that I've kind of dealt with that is to feel that emotion out. I think that's absolutely important, but then make it as productive as I can. How can I do that? I can keep educating people, keep informing people to the best of my ability, and making content that people are going to engage in. I'm not saying that you can change people overnight. Like I said, you absolutely can't do that. But there is a chance that if you keep chipping away at something, one day it might get there. So yes, I've absolutely had people that I know agree with me, and it's a scary thing, but change doesn't happen in the comfort zone. And also recognizing those differences in the people around you, those are important as well, because they are very formative. If you were just surrounded by like-minded people and you all did the same thing, you think the world was a pretty happy place, and it's not. So having those kind of influences in your life, wherever they are, it keeps your life real. It keeps you in reality and settled. So I wouldn't say push those people away necessarily, but having as healthy discussions as you can whilst protecting yourself can be really beneficial. Madison, how do you communicate with people who refuse to look at someone's different point of view? Yes, this boy that I'm talking about was exactly an example of that. I would say it's really difficult to achieve a balance. It's difficult with every person that you kind of communicate with. I would say for me, it's a mixture of, again, facts and personal experience. However, when people have disagreed with me, personal experience is almost always discounted, because their argument will be, well, that was just in your case, kind of thing. That just happened to you. It doesn't mean that that's the same for everyone else. So using factual information with people who refuse to look at someone's different point of view is a really good way to go about that. It can be intimidating sometimes, because it can feel like, but how am I meant to know all of this? How do I remember all this information and stuff like that? You don't need to kind of memorize all these stats and figures, but having something roughly in your background. And I think the best way to do this is just to read. I'm such a I mean, I do an English degree, so of course I'm an advocate for reading, but I just think that reading as much as you can, whether it's kind of fictional texts that really conceptualize ideas like race in a innovative way, or whether it's kind of factual texts like Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reniero Lodge. That is a fantastic text, which I'll put in the chat after this. Things like that are just so, so important. And you can use them as recommendations as well. Sometimes people want to do their own research. A lot of the time people can be embarrassed if you kind of have all this knowledge and they don't. So giving them some pointers can always be a really, really good start.
I was wondering, where do you like, I don't know, where do you draw the line for like, I know you talked about like keeping people you disagree with, not like just having healthy discussions, but where do you draw the line in those friendships?
I think it's difficult because I think for me that was a personal balance. When I first realized this last summer, it was very emotional for me. It was very upsetting, and there was a point where I thought, how can I live with someone like that? I don't know if I can live with him, and we'd already kind of arranged a house contract, so I had to. But there comes a point where you just have to protect yourself. There was no way out. I was going to have to live with him. He's not an awful person either, and I think this is the other thing that I've realized more and more of, particularly nowadays. I think because we have to, and because politics are so polarized, most people really root a lot of their identity in their politics, and that's absolutely fine. Everyone has a right to that, but there is a separation there somewhere, and I think trying your best to see that, trying your best to realize that just because someone votes for a certain party doesn't mean that that represents every single side of them. They wouldn't necessarily go through with every single policy. They vote for what best fits them, and remembering that as best as I can when I converse with people like that is really important. And also just picking and choosing my moments. Most of the time, especially with someone like him, I won't necessarily engage in topics like racism, simply because I know what the outcome's going to be, and I know that my time is better spent elsewhere. And like I said earlier, you've really got to protect yourself and choose when is best for you. Sometimes I have a bit of fire in my belly and I think, you know what, today's the day I'm going to wind you up and we're going to talk about this. But sometimes I'm just like, you know what, that's not for me. I'm going to put my energy into creating a resource that is going to educate people in a better way than just this one-on-one conversation. So it's about those long-term, short-term goals again. What is an accomplishment that you're most proud of when you reflect regarding the spread of education and polarizing issues? Funnily enough, it's actually not the kind of 100,000 likes on Instagram. After a while, it gets pretty hard to conceptualize. 100,000 people is kind of out of my reach. That's amazing. And I think I'm really glad about the impact that that has had. Absolutely. For me, genuinely, things like this, where I get to engage with people who are in completely different circumstances, in different spaces in the world, who are doing differently. This is what makes me really proud, because I get to talk to you guys and I get to really, sometimes it can really feel like when you're doing this work, you forget that the rest of the world exists in a way, because you're so focused on who you are and what you're doing and where you are, that you can forget, you know, just how close these issues are for the rest of the world. So being able to engage in these topics on a global scale makes me really happy, makes me really proud, because this kind of thing does create change, and I really do believe in that. And I think when I did my Instagram lives with you guys last year as well, that was such a big moment for me, because it proved as well that despite, again, I had probably, I think, 800 followers back then. My platform was tiny in comparison to other people, but I was still using my voice for good. I was still using that platform to create some change. So that's probably what I'm most proud of, is not giving up on that, despite sometimes demotivating figures. Figures don't listen to figures. They're almost irrelevant. Yeah, so one more question, probably. Anyone got anything else? Last one from Judith. Did anyone inspire you to do what you do? Yes. The answer for that will always be my dad. My dad actually passed away in June last year, but he was absolutely my rock, my best friend. He was always the person that exposed us to conversations like this, always made sure that we were very, very engaged, thank you, very, very engaged in these kinds of issues. And so that was always really important for us. He was incredibly supportive from the off, and I'm sure that he still is. But I remember having some very, very heavy conversations with him this time last year when the civil rights movement was kicking off. And he went to university in the kind of late 70s. He protested for Nelson Mandela. He was kind of always had that activist spirit. And for him, I remember having conversations where he was brought to tears because he couldn't believe that this was happening in his children's lifetime as well as his own. And so for me, that's always going to be my drive is my dad and my parents. So finding that person who you can just do that for endlessly is always a great motivator.
Thank you so much, Ria.
No worries, thank you. I think that's everything I've got time for, but yeah.
Well, the next time you come, we will have more time. Excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, guys.